This is lecture number 7 in the Cardiovascular series, and our learning objectives for this particular lecture are pretty simple and straightforward. We're going to look at the EKG. I don't mean to suggest that the EKG itself is simple, but for the way that we're going to break it down for our course, we're going to cover really just the basics of it, not with any meaningful interpretation at all. So number 1, we want to describe the major components of the electrocardiogram. This is the ECG or EKG. It's the same thing. EKG and ECG are the same thing. It's called the electrocardiogram. And we want to look at, well, what is the main point behind the ECG? What is it measuring? Is it measuring pressure? Is it measuring volume? Is it measuring contractile activity? Is it measuring electrical activity? And the answer is electrical activity. So there's your answer for our learning objective 2. And then what do the following ECG components represent? And these are the big ones, big things that we see. And that is the P wave, the QRS complex, and the T wave. Okay, so let's get into it. So when you look at the ECG, remember that this is your heart, and we're just kind of blowing up the heart real big just to kind of make a point. And there's different ways to do the ECG, and this is one way to do it where electrodes are attached to the surface of the skin of these different areas. There's the right arm, the left leg. Again, there's more advanced versions of this where you're putting electrodes all over the chest in a certain pattern. And again, the difference between these different these different methods, it's not such a big deal for us. If you're running ECGs, obviously you want to know about this in terms of optimal placements of these electrodes and things like that. But again, those details are beyond the scope of what we need to do. But ultimately, what is it doing? If you look at this picture here, you'll see that here's got Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3. And so this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. And what these are giving 3 different views on electrical activity of the heart. Now, let me just kind of grab something here so I can show you. So what I grabbed was this little piece, this little circle here, and remember, let's go through what we already know. We already know that right over here, this is where the SA node is. It's going to live up in this neighborhood. And then how is the heart going to depolarize? Well, after this, if we take another snapshot, we're going to see that the atria themselves both are going to have depolarized. The next snapshot is that we're going to see things traveling through the AV bundle, then the bundle branches working its way over here. And then the next snapshot, again, this is assuming we take however many snapshots those were, let's say 4, is that from there, we're going to see depolarization come up this way, and at the same time, a wave of depolarization coming up this way on the left ventricle. And so these are different snapshots that we're really looking at. And what we're seeing is, again, electrical activity. Well, now what I want you to imagine is, let's imagine that you are somebody sitting right over here. And let's put a smiley face in this guy. Oops. Let's put a smiley face in this guy. And to say, you're sitting right over here, and you're looking from this perspective over here. Let me attach an arrow. You're looking at electrical activity from this particular perspective. And what we'll do is let's have 2 more people here, right? So there's one gentleman up here, there's one lady right over here, another person right over here, and they're all looking at the heart. And this is what these different leads or these different views are showing us. This guy is looking from point of view number 1, Roman numeral 1. This guy is looking from point of view number 2. This guy is looking from point of view number 3. And so now if we were to go back and look at that electrical current again, and let's just start it off here. And just to make life simple, let me just do this. Let me say the current runs from here to here, to here, and then back up. Okay? Now, what does this guy see? What this guy sees is he sees the current going, starting here, and then running away from him. Again, this is his perspective right over here. And now it's running away from him more. Now it's running away from him more. Now that's running away from him more. Now, again, imagine these as being line of sight, okay? So this is what this guy sees. He's seeing it run away more, and now, all of a sudden, it looks like that current is coming back towards him. All right, so that was this guy up top. Let's look from this perspective. What is he seeing? Well, what he's going to see is he's going to see the current starting on the left side of his perspective, going to the right, moving to the right, continuing to move from the right, continuing to move to the right, continuing to move to the right, and then kind of looping back towards the left, whether here or here. This would be kind of deeper in. This would be more superficial, so to speak. Now, you can see then the way these 2 people will describe the electrical activity is going to be a little bit different. If we go this to the third guy, what's he going to see? He's going to see the current way off in the distance on the right side, and now he's going to see the currents coming closer to him, but moving to the left, closer to him, moving to the left, closer to him, moving to the left, closer to him, moving to the left, even closer to him, moving to the left, and now all of a sudden it turns and moves back towards the right. Look, the point here is this. The point is that depending on your point of view, you'll describe that electrical depolarization a little bit differently. So it's this old story that maybe you've heard of, is that maybe you've heard this kind of story or fable or anecdote or whatever you call these things, where there's three blind men and they're all touching an elephant and they're trying to describe the elephant, and one person is like, oh, an elephant is like a big giant wall because he's touching the body. Another blind person is saying an elephant is thin and slender and slimy because he's touching the trunk. Another guy is saying an elephant is, I don't know, whatever, because he's touching the tail. So they're all correct, but they have different perspectives on this elephant. This is the beauty of the ECG. When you look at the ECG itself, and I don't, hang on just a second. I just pulled this up on Google. I just randomly Googled, I said ECG Leads just to show you guys. And if you look here, you can see that this is a different kind of setup than the one I just showed you on the PowerPoint. You don't have to know any of this. I just want you to understand. You got leads going all over the chest, as well as his legs and his arms and things like that. So really, going back to that idea of difference in perspective, what that will look like is, let's just say this is normal. Okay, let's just say this is a normal, healthy readout. This is showing you, again, from these 12 different perspectives, because this is a 12-lead ECG, from 12 different points of view. On our slide, I said we only had, oops, wrong slide. On our slide, I said we're only looking at from 3 different points of view, okay? But for a more advanced version, you might be looking from 12 different points of view. And then what you'll see then is that these, we call them deflections from this kind of baseline, they're gonna look different. If you look here just at lead number 1 versus lead number 3, they look way different. And why do they look way different? Because the way that line deflects is dependent on kind of the directionality of that electrical movement. And so, again, it's not for us to try to interpret these types of things, but I want you to see that for cardiologists who really know what they're doing and can kind of look at these things wisely, this type of image, oh, it just occurred to me that maybe you're not seeing the whole thing. So there's the picture. Hopefully that's in your frame now. Then they can say, look, when I take the heart and I twirl it around and look at it differently and twirl it around again and twirl it around and examine the electrical behavior from all different angles, then I can really, really see whether or not there's an issue in the electrical currents running through the heart or not. Okay, and so that's what our well-trained cardiologists are doing and looking for. In any case, back to where we are. This is why ECGs are useful, because they are giving us a picture of electrical activity of the heart. Now, if you just take kind of your standard readout, and whether this is the lead 1 or whatever it might be, this is kind of our standard our standard image of a traditional deflection of an ECG. And here they are. We see this line over here. When this line moves up, this is called a P wave. From there, we see a slight deflection downward, then back up, and then back down. These are Q, R, and S. But we clump all of those together to call it a QRS complex. And so you might find people just talking about the R wave or just talking about the S wave itself, but realistically, most people are talking about this whole shebang, this whole thing, and calling it the QRS complex. And then from there, we have over here something called a T wave. So each of these deflections represents some electrical event. So what does the P wave represent? The P wave represents atrial depolarization. The QRS complex represents ventricular depolarization. And then the T wave represents ventricular repolarization. Okay, so one more time, atrial depolarization, ventricular depolarization, ventricular repolarization. If any of these, if it's supposed to look this way and all of a sudden we see that it looks very blunted or prolonged or something like that, again, that's meaningful to your cardiologist. And then ventricular repolarization. So what is it that we're missing here? If you look here, what do we have that's missing? What do we have? I guess we don't have it then. What is missing? What's missing here is atrial repolarization. So remember what happens is after depolarization, shortly after, you're going to see repolarization. We certainly see that with the ventricles. So why don't we see atrial repolarization? The reason we don't see it is that it occurs right about here. And the electrical event of ventricular depolarization is so big and so massive. Remember how big that tissue was? It's so big and so massive that it masks and obscures atrial repolarization. So does the atrium repolarize? Of course it does. It has to. We just can't visibly see that on the ECG because it's hidden by this massive electrical event, which is ventricular depolarization. So this slide is showing you again, we're starting off the SA node, and as the atria begin to depolarize, we start to see deflection here, and that is your P wave. As we head down into the ventricles and start to depolarize the ventricles, we now start to see that QRS complex, right? We're starting to dip into that area here. And as the ventricles depolarize, that's where we see this completion of the QRS complex. And then we continue, ventricular depolarization is complete. As I start to repolarize, and that would be in this artist depiction where it's no longer yellow, but this wave of red is washing back over it, which is representing repolarization. As you see here in the key, that red or salmon is repolarization. We see that ventricular repolarization is going to be represented in the T wave of the EKG. Okay? And that is the EKG. Let's wrap it up. Describe the major components of the EKG. That is the P wave, the QRS complex, and the T wave. And what do they, and that's these components here. P wave is atrial depolarization. QRS complex is ventricular depolarization. T wave is ventricular repolarization. And what does the ECG measure? It measures electrical activity of the heart. And that wraps it up for lecture number 7.